Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Keir Starmer praised the special relationship as they announced new deals on technology and civil nuclear power at Chequers. Both leaders called the trade agreement a tough but mutually beneficial win. Internet and phone lines are cut across Gaza as Israeli tanks move through key gateways into Gaza City. Residents say troops now control the eastern suburbs and are pounding areas leading to the city centre, where hundreds of thousands shelter. The US Embassy in New Delhi revokes and denies visas for Indian business executives accused of trafficking fentanyl. Prosecutors. The chemicals are used to make fentanyl a leading cause of overdose deaths in America. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits troops in Donetsk, meeting soldiers fighting Russian advances near Dobropilla. He thanks defenders for their achievements and presents them with state awards. Russia warns Japan's new sanctions over the Ukraine war are unfriendly and will not go unanswered. Moscow's foreign ministry says countermeasures will be well thought out, including possible asymmetric actions. Hundreds of thousands join nationwide protests in France as unions demand President Emmanuel Macron scrap planned budget cuts. Teachers, rail workers, medics and students stage strikes and blockades in a show of defiance against austerity. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich says Gaza could become a real estate bonanza, claiming a business plan is on President Trump's desk. The controversial idea envisions redevelopment after Palestinians are displaced, a move widely condemned as illegal. Israeli officials say 2 people are killed in a shooting at the Allenby crossing between the West Bank and Jordan. Security forces shot dead the assailant as the military investigates the incident. Now we start in Europe, where US President Trump has held a bilateral meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, where both leaders discussed the strong relationship between their respective countries. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer highlighted the much-celebrated special relationship, noting the support of over 2.5 million jobs across both economies. He also pointed out the presence of leading figures from both British and American businesses in the meeting. Starmer then talked about the trade deal with the US, calling it the biggest of its kind in British history, with billions flowing both ways across the Atlantic. He stressed that the UK had secured the best deal with the lowest tariffs in the world in key sectors, while acknowledged the tough negotiations. He emphasised that it was done for a reason, describing it as a win for both sides. He also underlined the significance of the upcoming technology partnership, the Tech Prosperity Deal, calling it a blueprint to win this new era together. For his part, President Donald Trump described his second state visit to the UK as an exquisite honour. Trump stated that there is no more natural partnership in the world, particularly when it comes to building up the industrial capacities of both countries, which he considered crucial for defence. Trump also revealed that more than $17 trillion had been invested in the US this year. He credited the impact of tariffs in generating trillions of dollars for the country, asserting that without them, the US would have only a fraction of the investment seen. Both the countries signed various agreements, including investments from Microsoft, Nvidia, CoreWave, and also the cooperation on the civil nuclear power deal, where US company X Energy and British company Centrica, owner of British Gas, announced a deal to deploy nuclear reactors across the UK. Let's take a listen in to what Donald Trump had to say.
Inheritance. Today we're making those ties closer than ever before. We've done some things that financially are great for both countries. and we work together, and it keeps us together. And I think it's an unbreakable bond we have, regardless of what we're doing today. I think it's unbreakable. But this is very big, and I want to thank all of the incredibly talented business leaders, the best in the world, biggest in the world, here this afternoon for investing in the Anglo-American Alliance. And we're taking in trillions of dollars from tariffs, and they've been so incredible for our country, so incredible. We're keeping our companies happy, we're keeping them solid and sane, and they're very, very thrilled at what's happened. They can't even believe it. And we've never seen investment like this. Without the tariffs, we would have just a fraction of that. And we're really the only one that can do tariffs. Nobody else is. And we'll have regulation, but it'll be sane regulation. It'll be regulation that allows you to compete and do your thing, or regulations that you're able to get around and do things, and you no longer have that regulation. But we slashed regulations at a level that's never been done before, and we're doing it at the same level right now.
Okay, we are now looking at live visuals of Chequers, where that deal was made, a huge deal of over 200 billion US dollars. We've just seen a press conference come out of there where the US President and the United Kingdom Prime Minister exchanged words of flattery and, of course, announced that huge deal with partnerships in the likes of AI and nuclear technology, where they, of course, once again praised their special relationship, as it is so called. We are now joined by Ross Feingold, who joins us. He is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Thank you very much, Ross. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. We saw flattery from both sides, Ross, as expected, in the President and Prime Minister's previous interactions. They have both been filled with positivity on both sides when it comes to their relationship, despite pressure domestically. Both leaders have called the US-UK bond the most natural partnership in the world. Do you think this rhetoric reflects reality?
I think it's fair to say that it does. At the moment, the two sides have a trade deal. It's subject to further refinements. But we have these business leaders who came with President Trump, and they pledged to make significant investments in the UK, most notably Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. And he's been doing the rounds of different media over the past 24 hours, reiterating the commitment of his company to invest in the UK. And he's also been praising the UK AI ecosystem. And at the same time, we have British companies attending these events, attending the state dinner and the other events with President Trump, pledging to invest more in the United States, which obviously makes President Trump very happy. So at the moment, as far as this visit goes, both sides are saying the right things. It's very positive. There's really been no criticism of the UK from President Trump, and we've become very used to President Trump praising America's traditional European allies on issues like defense spending or market access, et cetera, et cetera. But we're not seeing that with President Trump during this visit. So it's very positive from the United States side, as well as positive from the UK side. And I'll just add a final point on that. What's very interesting here is it's a Labour government. You know, Keir Starmer is a left of center leader. And normally one would have expected that President Trump would have gotten along better with a conservative prime minister, somebody like Boris Johnson or Liz Truss, however briefly she was prime minister, or Rishi Sunak. But the two leaders, President Trump and Prime Minister Starmer, they seem to be getting along on a personal level, which is very important. And the visit is going very well.
Yes, indeed, Ross. Thank you. Do stay with us. We're also joined by Dr. Jayant Menon. He's a senior fellow at the ISEAS at the Yusof Ashak Institute, and joining us live from Singapore. Dr. Menon, thank you very much for joining us. This new tech prosperity deal, it was described as a new blueprint to the new era. We have, of course, the likes of AI, the likes of nuclear sectors being discussed here. What might this new partnership mean for global tech competition, especially against China, Dr. Menon?
Right. I think clearly that's a motivation for these two countries to come together. The UK is one of the US's longest-standing allies, and one that President Trump hasn't treated in the same way as he has some of the others. He's been quite cordial and quite, positive in his engagement with this particular ally. But they are two developed countries with a strong skills base, very strong educational institutions in both countries. So there's obvious merit in collaborating in a highly skills-intensive sector like AI development. Sure, I mean, the push from China moving ahead is a further incentive to do this, but it's still early days. We need to wait for the details to come through on what exactly is, being envisaged here on the types of investments, types of cooperation. It's standard in these sorts of meetings to be to exaggerate the types of engagement, but we'll have to wait for some details. But this is a positive sign, and I think as long as the AI development is not too exclusive, everyone can benefit. There's concerns about greater inequality arising out of the so-called superpowers dominating AI. But that's a different kind of challenge we'll have to face a bit later on.
Yeah, and Dr. Menon, just finally and quickly, of course, what didn't go mentioned was the friction between the two countries. Was that they didn't disagree on. Of course, Donald Trump's UK state visit comes to an end now, and Donald Trump being a leader that seems to have come a little bit too close to Vladimir Putin, which is Britain's obvious perspective on that, and of course Britain's intention to recognise a Palestinian state at the UNGA next week. What are your thoughts on the differing standpoints that might lead into the next week, where both leaders are also expected to speak, and of course the absence of those issues in these meetings?
Yeah, there are a lot of these other non-economic issues that where the two countries are not necessarily aligned. But I think what's remarkable is how we've seen very little of that play up so far. Unlike when Trump goes to any other part of Europe and has discussions on NATO and so on. These have not been dominant, and they haven't interfered with the business side of things, not so far at least. And I don't think they will. I mean, the UK is keen to reestablish links after Brexit. They've got to, try and get a free trade agreement in place to guarantee market access after Brexit. And so I think they have to be a bit more accommodating. And Trump, as I said, seems to be, quite enamored by all this pomp and ceremony and all the graciousness as he's been given. So it looks like all the other negative issues can be put aside for now in this particular case. And they're going to focus on the cooperation on the business side.
Yes, Dr. Menon, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Pleasure to having you on. We now stay in Europe next, where France has been brought to a standstill today as more than 250 demonstrations swept across the country in protests against looming budget cuts. Unions say some 800,000 people have joined the strike, disrupting trains, schools and even pharmacies, with 90% shutting their doors. High school students also blocked campuses, voicing anger over education cuts. Tensions flared in Lyon, where police fired tear gas at masked protesters, leaving a journalist and an officer injured. Union leaders hailed the strike as a success, warning Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu against pushing ahead with austerity measures first floated by the ousted François Bayrou government. Protesters even stormed the finance ministry in Paris, demanding the state tax the rich instead of slashing public services. Opposition leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon has now called for a confidence vote, saying today's unrest shows Macron's new government is already on shaky ground. Let's take a listen in to what Sophie Bennett has to say.
Oui, aujourd'hui, on peut dire dès ce midi que la mobilisation est d'ores et déjà un succès. Nous avons recensé sur les manifestations de ce matin plus de 400 000 manifestantes et manifestants et l'essentiel des manifestations vont s'élancer cet après-midi. Nous avons recensé 260 manifestations dans toute la France. Il y a des milliers et des milliers de grèves sur tous les lieux de travail. Aujourd'hui, les salariés se lèvent pour dire que cette nuit sans fin du macronisme, on n'en peut plus. C'est plus possible qu'en permanence, on nous fasse les poches pour éponger les frasques des multinationales et des ultra-riches. Nous voulons de la justice, nous voulons que ce budget Bayrou, ce musée des horreurs, soit enterré définitivement. Moi, le message que j'ai à dire aujourd'hui à Monsieur Lecornu, c'est que c'est la rue qui doit écrire le budget. Et si ça n'est pas le cas, c'est Monsieur Lecornu qui finira à la rue.
We're now once again joined by Ross Feingold, political analyst. Ross, French politics has been severely unstable as of late. Today's demonstrations, what do they show about the stability of Macron's new government under Sébastien Lecornu?
The government might be weak, but President Macron is going to be the president until 2027. That's not going to change. One thing that also doesn't change is that, and this goes back decades already, every time a French prime minister or president proposes cuts to the social welfare state, people take to the streets and protest and they strike. And this has happened repeatedly, and it's an ongoing problem in French society. And ultimately, it needs to be resolved because the cost of the social welfare state is simply not sustainable. France is under extraordinary pressure from the United States and its European partners to improve or increase their spending on national defense, obviously. And to be fair to France, they've been a significant spender to assist Ukraine as well. But again, this is not sustainable, and there's no solution other than reducing the social or shrinking the social welfare state. And at some point, the public needs to accept that. But again, what we've seen repeatedly for decades is every time a government, doesn't matter who the prime minister or the president is, proposes that, people take to the streets, they strike, they protest, and the government backs off.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you and getting your insight on these issues. We now move on once again and over to Europe's defining crisis. Whereas the Russia-Ukraine war continues to intensify, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Ukraine's military is carrying out a counter-offensive operation near the Dobropilya and Pavlovsk in east, and it's aimed at thwarting Russian plans for further advances. Zelensky also announced that Ukrainian troops have reclaimed 7 settlements in the Donetsk region, emphasizing Ukraine's ongoing resilience on the front lines. He recently visited the region to assess the situation personally. Meanwhile, a Russian-guided bomb strike on the city of Konstantinivka has killed 5 people and left dozens more wounded, according to Ukrainian police. Rescue teams are working amid heavy damage to residential buildings and infrastructure. Now we are joined by our guest, Mohammed Osman. He is an international relations specialist and he joins us live from the Egyptian capital of Cairo. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for joining us on this subject. Mohammed, given the heavy toll on both sides here, we have an estimated around the Russians have lost around 1 million troops, the Ukrainians close to that. How sustainable, if the war continues and how it is currently, are these Ukrainian counteroffensives in the long run?
Thank you for having me, Thomas. Greetings to you and to your audience. Well, of course, this, as we all know, the Russia-Ukraine war has turned since the spring of 2022 into a war of attrition, more or less. Now it is basically a battle of who has more manpower, who has more meat to dispense on the front line, and who has more ammunition and who has more military infrastructure. And of course, we all know, if we do the math, that this calculation or this calculus favors Russia decisively, and this has been demonstrated throughout the course of this war. Even though Ukraine has valiantly defended its territorial integrity at the initial phase of the war, and even carried out counteroffensives, recapturing significant parts of occupied Ukraine, especially in the Kharkiv and Kherson oblasts. However, of course, at this point, the Ukrainian steam train ran out of steam, and afterwards Russia called up some of its reservists and reconstituted its forces and regrouped and started establishing very stern defenses. So when it came to Ukraine actually launching a massive counteroffensive in the spring of 2023 and the summer of 2023, it ended in an absolute disaster, a decisive Ukrainian defeat. And since then, Russia has been advancing on the fronts, on all fronts, especially in the Donbass, where they have they now control the entirety of the Lugansk Oblast, and they control about 75 to 80% of Donetsk. And of course, we all know that this war started over those two restive region, which have witnessed a substantial conflict between the predominantly ethnic Russian ethnic group in the Donetsk or Lugansk area and the Ukrainian government before Russia launched the all-out war against Ukraine, between the separatists and the government. So what's happening right now is President Zelensky claiming that this is a counteroffensive. Of course, this is not a counteroffensive. These are counterattacks, tactical attacks on the Dobropilla front, which was basically a dash by the Russian troops in this area in the vicinity of Pokrovsk to capture more areas before the Anchorage summit between Putin and Trump, so that Putin might enhance his negotiating position with the Americans. And it did serve that purpose, since the U.S. Took nothing from the Russians so far. They have obtained no concessions, and the negotiations basically are in a state of complete paralysis. So right now, the Russians are steadily advancing on the Pokrovsk front and axis, according to independent military observers, unlike what Mr. Zelensky is claiming. And the Russians are also actively advancing in other parts of Donetsk, especially on the Seversk axis, and also in the Kharkiv axis. They are advancing in both Vovchansk and Kupiansk. So the Russians are basically attempting to enhance their battlefield position and maintain the military initiative on the ground, hoping that at some point, if they do come to sit down for negotiations, that Russia would continue to have the upper hand and dictate its conditions for a peace settlement in Ukraine in the future, but not the near future, as so it looks.
Yes, Mohammed, do stay with us. We have further updates. A senior Russian officer that has said that Russian forces are advancing across all fronts in Ukraine, with the heaviest fighting around the logistics hub of the Pokrovsk in Donetsk. General Valery Demonstrators, Russia's chief of staff, has claimed progress in the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and the Dnipropetrovsk, describing advances as practically in all directions. He noted Ukrainian troops are concentrating their best units in the Pokrovsk, allowing Russian gains elsewhere, including Kupiansk and Yampil. Let's listen in.
Наши войска в зоне специальной военной операции наступают практически на всех направлениях. При этом наиболее упорные бои развернулись на красноармейском направлении, где противник любыми способами, не считаясь потерянными, стремится остановить наше наступление и перехватить инициативу. Для этого командование ВСУ в район Красноармейска перебросил наиболее боеспособные и подготовленные подразделения в ущерб другим направлениям, на которых наше наступление развивается.
However, Russian gains have been limited. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Ukraine successfully repelled the last 3 offensives, and troop reports near Kupiansk confirm Russian losses and captures. Okay, we have further updates from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where Ukrainian Defense Minister has denied Denis Shmyhal and Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kamysz have signed a memorandum on the creation of a joint operational group of unmanned aerial systems. This group will become a platform for coordinating and developing joint initiatives, integrating the latest protection technologies and initiating new projects. Let's listen in to what Denis Shmyhal and Władysław Kamysz had to say.
Про окремі програмні продукти, до яких надамо доступ нашим польським колегам, для того, щоб вони могли бачити заздалегідь всі атаки росіян, зокрема ті, які будуть спрямовані потенційно проти наших сусідів, наших друзів. Відповідно, ми будемо розширювати цю співпрацю і також ділитися нашим, скажімо, програмним продуктом і інформацією, яка є в нашому розпорядженні, координувати нашу діяльність, наші зусилля якраз на військовому, на технічному рівні. Будемо посилювати співпрацю між нашими оборонно-промисловими підприємствами. Україна є світовим лідером у сфері безпілотних систем, тому ми готові розвивати спільні проекти у напрямку повітряних, морських, наземних дронів, роботизованих систем.
To jest współpraca pomiędzy zarówno siłami zbrojnymi, instytucjami badawczymi, naukowymi, ale również pomiędzy naszymi przemysłami. Na tym nam bardzo zależy, żebyśmy mogli tworzyć wspólne inicjatywy przemysłu zbrojeniowego. Jeszcze raz ją podkreślę, dronowa i antydronowa. To jest wielkie wyzwanie, to jest wielka szansa dla całej Europy, bo przecież to nie tylko o Polskę chodzi. Ale rozmawiamy i z Komisją Europejską, przedwczoraj rozmawiałem z komisarzem Kubiliusem o działaniach, które może Unia Europejska podjąć z innymi państwami flanki wschodniej, bo to dotyczy całej flanki wschodniej Unii Europejskiej i Sojuszu Północnoatlantyckiego.
Mohammed, of course, this comes after these recent drone incursions which have been happening recently. How important is this recent Ukraine-Poland drone memorandum in terms of these shifting balances on the battlefield?
I think this is a Polish response to the Russian escalation that was a very dangerous escalation, of course, which saw incursions by suicide drones into Polish territory. This did happen before, by the way, on several occasions since the beginning of the war, but never on this scale, about 19 or 20 drones penetrating Polish airspace at once from both Ukraine and Belarus and flying well into eastern Poland, causing a disruption in air traffic and the suspension of air traffic in the area. And Poland did shoot down a couple of these drones. And of course, since Poland could only shoot about 2 or 3 drones out of 20, this means that they have a problem with their air defenses, which were basically drained. The entirety of the European part of NATO, at least, they have been drained by supplying Ukraine with huge amounts of air defenses and air defense ammunition and ordnances, which caused an acute shortage in European stockpiles. And of course, this was very evident in what Russia, when these drones penetrated not only Poland, by the way, they penetrated Romania also. And even though Moldova is not a NATO country, but it is a neutral country that is not part of this war. But of course, Moldova is very supportive of Ukraine. So as you can see, Russia was basically conveying a very defiant message to the Polish side and to the entirety of NATO, telling them that any ideas about a settlement that would entail the deployment of European troops, 30,000 European troops, according to what the President Macron of France has said, in Ukraine, in the case of a ceasefire, will be considered a red line by the Russians, and these forces will be considered enemy forces and will be targeted. And I think that Putin, or the President Putin, or the Russian leadership, were just backing up their words with actions on the ground, and at the same time also they were testing the resolve of NATO. However, NATO did respond. Fighter jets did scramble in the air to intercept these drones. But however, on the other hand, the U.S. so far has not clearly condemned or acknowledged that this took place. The U.S. is still saying President Trump said, oh, maybe it happened by mistake. And Marco Rubio said that, oh, it's unfortunate, it should not be repeated again, or it should not happen again. So the U.S. basically did not respond at the scale that it was expected of it, even though U.S. aircraft did participate in securing Polish airspace. So now Poland moved forward with this agreement with Ukraine in a clear provocation to the Russians, telling them that now we will also help Ukraine enhance its UAV capability, especially that Ukraine only has its only capability or its only means by which they target the Russian interior or the Russian strategic depth with drones, where they target Russian cities and Russian facilities with. So this is what the Polands are coming at. They are trying to provoke the Russians and respond to Russian violations of their airspace.
Yes, Mohammed Osman, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to get your insight on these issues. But that is all that we have time for this hour. But we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.